Now, the argument at the time was that these are not securities in the standard sense of the word, as per the Howey test, which I'm going to ask you to explain for us. But the bottom line, the SEC went after Ripple, claiming that their tokens, that their crypto was a security. Not you'll have to flesh out the difference between a currency and a security, but a security subject to the Security and Exchange Commission regulation. The judge came down. I suspect this decision is going to go right to appeal. Tell me if I'm wrong. But bottom line, they said Ripple can issue securities as securities, but that their crypto or their tokens, whatever we want to call them, do not pass the second aspect of the Howey test and are not securities and shall not be deemed to be securities. Ripple, obviously, once upon a time I had Ripple. I sold it when it was delisted because I never made a penny off crypto. Ripple obviously had a great day on Friday. The decision sounds sound, Robert, but I mean, I'll need you to flesh out for everybody who might not know exactly what the Howey test is. What is the Howey test? Is this decision the sound, correct decision? I know that you think it is. Does it get appealed, and what is the long-term prospect for Ripple specifically? And does this have actual ripple effects for all other cryptocurrencies out there?
Oh, without question, because the federal judge said that a digital token is not in and of itself a security. And that's precisely what the Securities and Exchange Commission was using the Ripple case to try to establish. The goal, and that's what there's criminal cases pending we'll get to that actually rely upon the assumption that a digital token is a security. There's a bunch, all those lawsuits involving crypto, almost that are trying to go after Tom Brady and Shaquille O'Neal and Matt Damon and all the rest, and Kim Kardashian and Mayweather and you name it, all rely upon the assumption that a digital token is a security and holding them liable for promoting security and without it being registered and without meeting other standards and tests. I have never believed, I think the SEC has always overreached. I think the Howey test is too broad. I mean, the SEC was meant to really govern stocks traded on Wall Street or traded on those kind of exchanges. It was never really intended to reach everyday, ordinary business activity, investing in commodities and currencies and other things of that nature outside of the stock market itself or something equal there too. But the Supreme Court expanded it dramatically during the peak of the New Deal so they could regulate whatever the heck they wanted. And basically now they can regulate anything as long as it's an investment contract. But even under that broad definition of security, a digital token never fit that definition. Nobody is buying the token. Few people are buying it as part of a contract. Two, here there were some institutional people that did, and thus that was subject to the security laws in the Ripple case, but everything else they rejected. But the investment of money, common enterprise, expectation of profit derived from the effort of others. That's too broad.
Well, if to play devil's advocate, I could see the investment of money. People buy crypto with the expectation.
What does that even mean, investment of money? Does that mean expenditure of money? Does that mean transfer of money? Does that mean transfer of other things?
Oh, no. I'm not going to, without commenting on whether or not this should be the test, just as far as the test goes, an investment money. Yeah, I spend $100 on Ripple. I'm not doing it because I think it's going to be worthless. I do it because it's going to be worth something. Like I buy a gold coin in a common enterprise. And that's where I guess the main distinction is. When you buy shares in a company, you want to have a say in the activities of the company. When you buy crypto, it's roulette. I mean, it's like sort of, in a way, it's sort of like gambling at a casino, where nobody would consider that, I don't think, a security.
You're not buying shares. And then the other component is the promoter component, which is, what should have been defined as a security is something that was more akin to a stock. And they should have defined it that way. And instead, the court just expanded it to reach things that were akin to stocks. And it ended up being anything that was an investment contract. And then what the definition of investment really ended up depending upon, because they were so vague about what common enterprise means, so vague about what it means to invest. It all came down to are you paying for somebody to promote it? And it's like, okay, now you've got every promotion plan out there. And that's way too big or broad of a definition. But even under that bit, and Ripple, to their credit here, try to restrict the definition of Howey, use it to say, here's what the law was really intended to get to. here's what's still consistent with Howry, but will restrict this from getting wayward. The court rejected Ripple's defense, but Ripple's defense will take that up through the appellate food chain and say this is what the law should be, because this is getting way too lax, way too liberal, way too much regulatory power. But even under that, the court said digital token doesn't even meet that standard. And so, I mean, what Ripple does, it's a cryptographic blockchain ledger. And then they created XRPs, a digital token. And some of those digital tokens they gave to employees and gave to key executives. Some they were allowed to be sold on an exchange where nobody knew who the seller or buyer even was. There was anonymity in that process. And then some they sold institutionally pursuant to contracts. Only the last one did she say, could that constitute a security? The rest, she said, don't, which is, she said, because there's no two main reasons why. When here, the anonymity function of Ripple was critical. The anonymity function, she's like, how can you call something an investment contract with an intention and expectation of promotion of the contract when the seller doesn't know who the buyer is and the buyer doesn't even know who the seller is? It's like, that's kind of nuts in the context of an exchange. So what she said is all the cryptos on exchanges are not securities. This guts all the civil lawsuits out there against all the so-called promoters. This guts the suits against Shaq, guts the suits against Tom Brady, it guts all of them. And so that was a massive, massive win against the SEC by Ripple, but for the entire crypto industry.
Robert, I'm just thinking out loud now, these markets where you have the futures on presidential candidates, those are not considered to be securities.
Well, I mean, there are aspects that the CFD, I think it was the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission. They were trying to regulate PredictIt on some grounds that they had regulatory control, but the Fifth Circuit stayed it. People have wondered why PredictIt's still up and active. That's why. The court was skeptical of and it hasn't been reached final adjudication, but they aren't allowing the government to enforce that, and nor should they. And I mean, I've had a problem with a lot of the gambling laws applying to a lot of what goes on in political betting or sports betting in general, because in reality, you're not. It's not random chance. It just isn't. It doesn't meet the definition of gambling. Gambling is something you have no control over the outcome of. And that sports betting, you absolutely have some control over the information that's either more likely or not less likely to occur. Same with political campaigns and the rest. So I think they've misapplied those laws in those contexts, but they've tried to apply securities, and California is also one of the worst. Future purchases in vehicles way back. It's an older case. They try to call that a security. I mean, they try to call all kinds of things a security that just aren't. It was meant to, I'm going to give you money for stock in an enterprise, right? I mean, that's what it was meant for. And if you want to apply it outside the stock market, okay, I'm not a big fan of that, but fine. To the penny stocks and the unlisted stocks and all those, okay. But that's what it was for. It was not for every other contract concerning a commodity or concerning a currency. And it should never have been applied there. Now, this case doesn't reach those aspects because it doesn't have to, because it says all you got to look at is the anonymity and by itself, and you realize that it just the very nature of a digital exchange. And then she said, as to all the money given to executives and employees, that's an in-kind benefit. They didn't even make the investment, so there's not even an investment here. So the government was trying to pretend that your labor time was equal to being an investment. That gives you an idea how badly they were trying to define investment. That now it meant anything in exchange for possible future compensation was now an investment. This was the problem with those too liberalized terms the Supreme Court used. But it's and they emphasize it doesn't matter if your motive is speculative, because going to your point, that was part of what the government was arguing. If your motive is to purchase this because you think it will go up in value, it's automatically a security. It's like, dear Lord, that covers a ridiculous number of things.
Baseball cards. I mean,
that's absolutely. Can you imagine everybody getting arrested for selling baseball cards because they're unregistered securities? I mean, that's how nuts what the government was doing. But it was essential to their war on crypto. Because, I mean, Ripple had been very effective at selling its XRP token on digital exchanges, but it's open source, which I like. So people can use it in a way it's more transparent than the problematic cryptos. It still has certain issues because people closer to it make the most money, and that can create an effect that's undesirable. But putting that aside, the open source component of it ended up saving it in many respects because it created the anonymity for the digital exchange to operate, but also it allowed people to use the app for all kinds of payment processing purposes and become almost a de facto medium of exchange that facilitated the current exchange around the world. And basically, it's removing power from central banks and government. That's what crypto really does. It limits surveillance power. It limits control power. It limits the government's ability and central banks' ability, and really a cartel of private banks, if you talk about the Eurodollar, who's really running the financial system more than the central banks or governments even are. And it precludes them from having the power they want. And that's why there was this SEC war on them. And this was a massive, this was their big test case. Massive defeat. But also it has all kinds of repercussions and ramifications for all those plaintiffs' lawyers thinking they were going to get rich. So in the shacks of the world, because they advertised or marketed a digital token.
Well, I mean, they could still go after the shacks for, I don't know, fraudulent misrepresentation, which, I'm thinking of Dennis.
Almost all their theories are promotion theories because they really don't have him knowing that the underlying, they don't even, I think, allege that he knew that what he was promoting wasn't good. They were saying you're a promoter, you're an unregistered promoter, hence you're liable under the securities law.
That's interesting.
If it's not security, bye-bye lawsuit.
When it comes to Kevin O'Leary, I sort of took for granted he knew what it was. He was in on the pump and dump.
He's a different story.
Yeah. Okay, so that's fascinating. They're not undoing the Howey test. I mean, we brought it up and we could see.
No, this judge did not. This just did not accept. But Ripple is preserving that. So that's the government risk for fighting this up through the appellate food chain, is that the court goes even further than an appeals court or the Supreme Court goes even further than district court does and says, we're going to clarify what this means going forward, and uses what Ripple called the essential ingredients test, which I think is saying, let's get this back to being stocks. It's got to be, you have a contract for the purpose of increasing the value of what you're purchasing, with depending upon the promoter's explicit and express commitment to promote it. If you include those components in it, you make it a stock, which is what Securities and Exchange Commission is supposed to be about, not about anything traded that they want to regulate.